Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, we are ready to go. Just so you're aware kind of the format of the day, my plan is to have a Q&A at the beginning of each of the after lunch sessions. So sessions 3 and 4 will begin each of those with Q&A. By then, I've presented enough of the basics that it may have brought up some questions. So if you have some questions by then that will apply, you think, to the general audience, go ahead and ask it then. If you've got any questions that you think others may not be interested in, it may be more specific to you, find me at lunch or during any of the breaks, or love to chat, or even stick around after the end of the last session. We've got nowhere to go but back to the hotel, so if you, I know most of you probably have to get out of here as fast as possible because you got to preach in your own church tomorrow. I'm just a guest speaker tomorrow, so I got nowhere to go. It's really nice just being a guest speaker. I'm really not in. There's a significantly smaller burden. Jeff is not preaching at his own church tomorrow. I'm preaching for him, but the burden will still be greater on him than on me. Right? We all know that feeling, right? Even if you're not preaching that morning, you got a morning off. No, I don't. I'm still here. This is not a morning off.
They always make that comment.
In fact, sometimes even a morning away has more tension than a morning there, where you can at least, anyway, let's move along. Alrighty, session 2, big churches, small churches, what's the difference? And again, all of the notes are going to be at that URL right there, so you can go to that at any time or save it for later and look it up later. One of the things I like about having the notes up there, you can confirm it later, because here's the deal. At lunch and maybe later on when you meet up with somebody from here, you're going to talk about me. I know that because at lunch your congregation talks about you. If you didn't know it until now, surprise! And I don't mind if you talk about what I said. I don't even mind if you disagree with what I say. The only thing I ask is disagree with what I actually said. That's all. That's all I ask. Just disagree with what I actually said. Don't accuse me of saying something I didn't say and then disagree with it, because if I didn't say it, I probably disagree with it too. And the nice thing about being able to go back to the notes is going, did he say this or did he say that? Let's check the notes. Oh, here's what he actually said. That's often very, very helpful for me. So disagreement I'm fine with. Confusion I've got a problem with. And distortion I've got a problem with. All right, let's take a look at a little bit more of my story to begin this next session. I'm a part of a denomination. Not going to name it because it doesn't matter and because I don't want to split the room.
You can name it.
I'll tell you by the end. I know some of you can guess now, and some of you are already way off. So, and in our denomination, like most denominations, we have an annual meeting. Our annual meeting is for the churches of our denomination in Southern California, from Fresno South. And every year we would go, and every year the head of our Southern California denomination would get up and give the state of the denomination report, as they should. And every year a part of that report contains some numbers, which it should. You know, there were this many salvations, this many churches open, this many churches closed. It's part of the report. And every year in the report, part of the report included this statement. Over 90% of our churches are under 200 and over 80% are under 100. Every year that stat was given, and every year the stat didn't change by more than 1 or 2 percentage points off of that baseline. A stat which, by the way, I have found to be shockingly consistent across regions and denominations. But every year after that statement was made, the next statement was always some version of, we have to fix this. It was always presented as an assumed problem. We were never told why it was a problem, but everybody in the room believed it was a problem. And so every year when I would hear that, my response would be, oh no. Not only oh no for our denomination, but oh no, I'm part of the problem. Because except for that one little season where we flipped up to 400, we were we were in the 90%, and for a lot of years we were in the 80%. Oh no, the person who's heading our denomination and whom I respect keeps telling me this is a problem, therefore I'm part of the problem. Oh no, I don't want to be a part of the problem. I want to be a part of the solution. I've got to get my numbers up. That was the feeling I had every year. And then I went during that year, right after the meltdown, right after the counseling happened. I was just beginning to get my feet back under me again, but still had a whole lot of skepticism and cynicism and anger in me. And I went to the next meeting, and the numbers came up again. He made the statement about the percentages. And have you ever been in a room where the speaker says something and then they go off in this direction, but while they're going off in this direction, what they said here triggers something in you and you go off in this direction, and you're not hearing a thing they're saying from this point on for the next 5 to 10 minutes? It may be happening to some of you right now. I'm aware. Well, that happened to me. He did the 80 to 90, and then I knew the next sentence was going to be, we need to fix this and some plan to fix it. And instead of listening to that, I triggered off and I went over here, and my response that year wasn't, oh no, it was, so what? Okay, fine. My church is small. So what? There's a whole lot of small churches in our denomination. So what? I don't care anymore. And the moment somebody says, I don't care anymore, that means they care so much they're no longer willing to admit it even to themselves. Yeah, my parents don't like me. I don't care anymore. Oh boy, wow, you've reached a real deep place of caring right now. So much you can't even admit it. That's where I was. I just don't care anymore, but because I cared so much. But when I ask so what, I'm stubborn. So when I ask so what, I actually want to find out so what. Right? So I did some research to find out the so what. And here's what I discovered in the so what. That statement says nothing about the health of the group of churches that you're dealing with. Because here's the way it goes. If the group of churches in question are in a place of renewal and revival, a part of the renewal and revival of a denomination is going to include the planting of new churches. It's not going to be entirely dependent on it, but it will include the planting of new churches. And when you plant new churches, they tend to be what size? Small. So when a group of churches is in renewal and revival, there will be more small churches because you're planting new churches. Likewise, when that same group of churches is in decline, then the individual congregations within that group are going to be declining in numbers, and so the percentage of small churches to big churches will still remain high. Whether a group of churches is in renewal and revival or in decline, there will always be about that percentage of small churches to big churches. So that stat by itself tells us nothing about the health of churches in question. You have to have more information than that. Now, it's not wrong to know that. You need to know that, but you need to understand what that does and does not tell you. You've got to add more information to it to understand whether or not that is a sign of health or a sign of decline. On its own, you don't know. So that was my so what moment. And then after that, and when the Lord really started helping me to understand the value of small churches and redefining success, I moved from so what to now what. Okay, our church is small. Now what? What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do with the situation that we find ourselves in? That is a neutral situation. It is not morally positive or negative. It is neither a sign of success nor a sign of failure. It simply is what it is. And what are we going to do about it then? As an illustration of that, there's a wonderful scene in the movie Apollo 13. And you've seen the movie, you know it's about what was supposed to have been the third moon landing. But on the way to the moon, they had damage to their spacecraft, and it turned into a rescue mission. And they didn't know if they would be able to get the 3 astronauts back alive again. And so there's one problem after another that occurs. And at one point, one of the engineers runs into Houston Control and says, we got a problem with the air filters. They're about to run out of air filters. And the chief at Houston looks at them and goes, how did we not have enough air filters? He said, well, they didn't get in the landing module to use those air filters. They've stayed just in the place they are. So they've overused those. And he says, well, then go to the landing module. It's still connected. Go to it and get those air filters. We brought them over. They're a different size and shape. To which Houston Ground Control goes, oh, tell me this isn't a government program? And they had round filters that had to go into square holes and they didn't fit. So the next scene is a couple engineers that take a couple really large boxes of material and they dump it onto a huge table. And in front of the other engineers, they essentially tell them this: everything that's on this table is everything that's on Apollo 13. If it's not on this table, it's not on the spacecraft, and the astronauts cannot use it. So we have to figure out how to fit this into this that is not designed to do this, using only the materials on this table, and none of the materials on the table are designed to do the job either. And if we don't get it done, and in time they die, get the job done with the wrong materials. I do not know of a better figure of speech for what it's like to pastor a small church than that. Really, Lord, this is the mess you gave me? These are the people I'm supposed to work with. This. And Jesus says, did you see the disciples I had? I'm convinced that half the reason Jesus chose the people he chose is so that pastors in America in the 21st century could look at it and go, oh, okay, I can hand over my folks. You did it with Judas and Thomas and Peter. And you haven't actually, you picked Judas and you knew that, right? At least I didn't pick him. I just have to live with him. And a lot of us in our small churches, we have an Apollo 13 table mess to work with, and that's what it feels like. Really, this is the mess, and I've got to, yes, that's the mess you've got to work with. The mission has not changed to get the job done. No excuses. That's the work we've got. There's a saying in business right now, and it's made its way into the church world. It's actually a very good one. It comes from a book called Good to Great by Jim Collins. And the saying is, you got to get the right people on the bus. How many of you have heard somebody say you got to get the right people on the bus, right? It's said a lot now. And what they mean is, if you're putting your team together, you got to make sure the right people are in the right positions. Otherwise, the whole team can fall apart with just one person in the wrong position. You can take everything down. You got to get the right people on the bus. The challenge when you're pastoring a small church is get the right people on the bus. These are my people. This is my bus. You're acting like I have choices here. There's no choices here. This is the building I've got. These are the people that I've got. It's not like there's no magical tree I can go out there and pick the right church members from. That doesn't exist. These are my people. This is my boss. There's no getting the right people on it. I have an Apollo 13 table mess. That's what I have. But the mission hasn't changed and lives are at stake. Get the job done. That's our now what? Okay, here's my reality. This is my situation. And this is where it gets into why is my church so good? Because the smaller your church is, the more you have to live with the Apollo 13 table mess. You see, any engineer can get the job done with the right materials and enough money and enough time. Any decent engineer can get that job done. But they make movies about the engineers who figure it out how to do it with limited time and the wrong stuff. If anybody can pastor a small church, anybody can do it. Why are you pastoring a small church? Maybe because Jesus thinks you've got the right stuff to do it, with the wrong stuff on the table. I know, I just mixed two movies together, I guess. Right? That's the situation that most of us find ourselves in. So now what? Now we've got to work with this weird conglomeration of stuff, and we've got the same mission as the church that has seemingly unlimited budget and unlimited time. They don't, of course. They've got their limitations too, but we've got the same mission. So let's take a look at these circles that we looked at earlier. On the left, we've got what I call big church essentials, and on the right, small church essentials. And you notice there is an overlap. I came up with this illustration because I like having a simple visual to explain big concepts. And anytime I found a visual that explained the concept of differences between big and small churches, it either looked like stairs or a step ladder. 50, 100, 500, 1,000. And when you look at an illustration that has small on the bottom, big on the top, what's the initial impression that hits you? Big, good, small, bad. Right? And the pressure to go up. Because if this is high, then that's low. I don't want to go low, I want to be high. So I wanted to come up with an illustration that showed the differences between big and small, but didn't leave us with the gut response of good, bad. And the Venn diagram does that. Because here's the deal with the Venn diagram. The bigger, we're coming from the church, from the circle on the right? This is a small church conference. So we're in the circle on the right. The bigger your church is, the more overlap you will have with big churches. And the smaller your church is, the less overlap you will have with big churches. That's it. Not better or worse. Just more overlap, less overlap. Which means the church of 500 is going to learn a lot more and get much greater benefit out of a big church conference than you are. Not because the big church conference is doing anything wrong, and not because you're stupid, but because they overlap more. There's more to gain from it because there's more overlap. I go and there's less overlap, and so I can gain less. Here's the deal. Nobody taught me that. Nobody taught me in Bible college or in early ministry that there were significant differences between the way big churches and small churches operated. I thought it was just the same, only bigger, the same, only smaller. And secondly, even if I had known that there was a difference, I wouldn't have known what part of what they're teaching in that left circle overlaps with mine and what part doesn't. Nobody gave me a filter to understand the differences. So what I'm hoping to do in the next 20 minutes or so is to give you a filter to help you understand the differences so that from now on, even when you go to a big church conference or read a book by a big church pastor, you will get more out of it because you'll be able to filter it properly. This has helped me do that. So the basic premise here is very simple. Many big church principles simply don't translate well into a small church context. Again, it's not because they're doing anything wrong. They're not. They're simply in an IKEA. They're doing IKEA real well. But I'm not in an IKEA. I'm in a Starbucks. So I'm going to do Starbucks real well. Now, if there's an overlap that I can learn from you, fine. But the smaller your church is, the less you're going to be able to get out of it. So I would recommend spending more time with other small church pastors because you will get more out of that. As you get bigger, then spend a little more time learning from bigger church pastors because the overlap is greater and the amount that you can learn that actually applies to you will increase. So you're getting more out of your time. So that's my hope. I'm teaching from the circle on the right. I'm not going to teach anything from the circle on the left because I don't do that well. But the Lord has helped me to learn how to do small church well. So some of what I say will overlap with big churches. It happens inevitably, especially if I'm at like a regular denominational conference where pastors of all size churches are in the room. When I announce I'm a small church pastor, I've literally seen the eyes roll of big church pastors like, oh, what am I doing here? I'm too close to the front. I can't get out. You can see the struggle. But then inevitably they'll come to me after a session or two and go, I'm actually getting a lot out of this too. Lo and behold, big church pastors coming from a small church pastor. There is some overlap, which means the information can go both ways in the overlap. It's really cool. But we're going to be talking about the circle on the right. And the first thing to understand is a lot of principles don't translate between circles. So there are differences. Now, in addition to these circles, let me add these circles. I call them my Wonder Bread dots. Now, in these Wonder Bread circles, you're going to notice three different characteristics. Characteristic number one, they're all different shades and colors. Characteristic number two, they're different sizes. And characteristic number three, and most importantly, they don't touch. Now, why don't they touch? Why are they different sizes? And why are they different shades? Here's why. Each of those small circles represents the part of your church that makes it different from any other church on the face of the earth. So, we've got three different types of information on the illustration. In the middle, you get information that applies to both big and small, that anybody at any church we can learn from each other. In the brown part of the big circle on the right are what all small churches have in common, but all small church pastors can learn from each other. Where a handful of times where I've given an illustration already, and everybody in the room has gone, oh yeah, I get it, yeah, me too, right? It's that part of it. But the small circle represents the part of your church where if you come to me and you go, I got something in my church, I'm sure it happens elsewhere, but it just seems weird to me. And this used to happen to me a lot over the years until I came up with this illustration. They'd come to me, I'd say, oh, yeah, tell me, I'm sure it's something we've heard before, and they'll give it to me, and my response would be, well, that is weird. Like, you are literally the only church on earth that I know that has that situation. And I'm not wrong. I'm not wrong. Because here's the deal. The smaller your church is, the larger your unique DNA part is. And the bigger your church is, the smaller the unique part is. Here's why. It's something based on something called the law of large numbers. The law of large numbers is a sociological phenomenon that says the bigger the crowd is, the more predictably it behaves. This is how every polling company works. So Gallup or Barna go out there and they do a survey of everybody. And so, Gallup goes out there and surveys 7,000 Americans and says, here's how America is likely to vote in whatever next election, or here's how they feel about this brand of toilet paper or whatever, right? And they are shockingly consistent. They can be right within 2 or 3 percentage points, but how many of you have ever seen a poll and said, this is how America feels about such and such, and you go, they never asked me, right? They don't need to ask you. They don't need to ask me. I've never been included in a poll yet that I'm aware of, although Facebook is listening, I'm sure. Hello, Jeff. Zuckerberg, that is not. They don't need to ask you, or they don't need to ask me, because of the law of large numbers. Here's the way it works with demographics, with polling. If you ask the right question of the right demographic mix of people, and here's the key for our talk today, and if you have a minimum sample size, all you have to do is add zeros, and you'll be right within 2 or 3 percentage points. But you have to have a minimum sample size, because the larger the group is, the more predictably it behaves. And if the group is too small, like if you surveyed this room, you would not have a representation of America. One, the demographic is too narrow, it's Christians and church leaders, and it's too small. Okay? So you've got to have a broader demographic, and you've got to have a certain number of people so that all of the idiosyncrasies of individuals kind of flatten out, and they don't concern the whole. Then you've got valid statistics. Okay? The minimum sample size matters. This is how it works at the big church conferences. So I'm going to throw numbers that seem ridiculous, but they actually take place. If you are pastoring a church of 2,000, and you go to a big church conference and you're listening to the pastor of a church of 20,000, you can take virtually everything that pastor of a church of 20,000 says and do it in your church. Just drop a zero. Why? Because at 2,000, you're well above minimum sample size. At 2,000 and at 20,000, you've got parking lot issues. You've got probably multiple venues. You've certainly got multiple staff members. You've got multiple age-related Christian education department. You're going to have multiple midweek groups from youth to kids to recovery to divorce and marriage workshops, right? All that stuff is in place in both churches. There's just 10 times more of them in the church of 20,000 than there are in the church of 2,000. All the same stuff, just more and less. That's slightly oversimplifying, but not much. That Venn diagram is almost completely overlapped at 2,000 to 20,000. So 20,000 down to 2,000, drop a zero, you're good to go. 2,000 down to 200, drop a zero, not anymore. Because at 200, you don't have the same stuff. Right? They're talking about parking lot grading, and you're going, parking lot? Our church doesn't have a parking lot, right? Oh, they're talking about staff meeting. Hey, when you get together for staff meeting and you're going in a church of 200, you mean me and my spouse? Or even if you have a couple staff members, most of them are volunteer, and so just putting together the calendar to get everybody in the room is hard. But they just assume if it's a staff member, you're paying them and they can just meet whenever you say you're supposed to meet. But you've got issues that they don't even have to deal with. They don't even have to think about. So from 20,000 down to 2,000, virtually no difference. 2,000 down to 200, a lot of differences, and a lot of it doesn't apply anymore. And 200 down to 50, a lot of differences again. And then you can take 2 churches of 50. They can be of the same denomination, in the same town, on the same street. And you might as well be on 2 different planets. Why? Because they got 50 different people than they've got. Now, I know what you're thinking, but the church of 2,000 over here has 2,000 different people in the church over here. True, but at 2,000, well above minimum sample size, the size of the crowd flattens out the individual personalities, so there are far more similarities than differences. How many of you have ever attended a service at a megachurch? Then you've been at all of them. And I don't mean that as an insult. I just mean when I know that the conference I'm going to is going to be at a megachurch, I have certain expectations and they are met every time. I know what the parking lot will be like. I know what the signage is going to be like. I know what the greeting is going to be like. There are certain things that they just do because they work at that size and because the system takes over at that size, because it has to. That's not a negative, that's not a put down. But the bigger churches have far more in common, which means they can share information more easily because it's systematically, it's pretty much all the same. Sure, there are some theological theological differences and so on, but stylistically, there's far more agreement across church size than there is through denominational. Two churches of 50 from different denominations will have more in common than a church of 50 will have with a church of 500 of the same denomination. At least in the way the church is run and the kind of things that pastors can talk to each other about how to pastor. So if you've got two churches of 50 might as well be on two different planets. Why? Because in this church of 50, if they lose one family, there goes their entire children's ministries department. They didn't just take the leaders, they took all the kids. Right? And in this church of 50, if that one person that we all love doesn't happen to show up at church this Sunday, we all breathe a little bit easier because you're not going to have to deal with that awkward confrontation in the lobby again this week. And don't you look like you don't know what I'm talking about, because every one of you has a name and face in mind right now. And here's the deal. Every church has one. And if your church doesn't have one, some other poor church has two. There are weeks that I'm convinced there's 3 churches in our area. Here's the deal. The church of 2000 has one as well. That just means that the pastor gets a weird email once a week. That's it. That's the impact. Because of the size of the crowd, it flattens out the impact. But that one person can ruin your Sunday. Can split your church. Can drive you out of ministry. The smaller the church, the bigger the impact of it. That's where the small church, and the weirdness of the small church comes from, because we're dealing with individual personalities more than demographics. So most of the church conference and leadership stuff is always about demographics. Even when I say a small church can be healthy, they go, well, what are the metrics to measure that? I don't know, what are the metrics to measure the health of your family? Once you get below minimum sample size, metrics matter far less. The numbers don't tell the story. You can't make them tell the story in a smaller group, because the numbers, you don't have a minimum sample size for the numbers to matter. It changes the dynamic of even how we determine health. You don't have the numbers to match it anymore. Percentage of people in small groups. I got a church of 20. We are a small group. Right? All of these things just don't matter so much. So you got the 2 churches of 50, and you've got, so what that means is basically this. The flip side of the law of large numbers is, I keep wanting to point there, and I know it's back there. The smaller the crowd, the more impact each person has, for good or for bad. So the bigger the crowd, the more predictably it behaves. The smaller the crowd, the more impact each individual has, which makes it less predictable. So we've talked about the bad, the one person who can ruin the Sunday. But there's also a good to that. As an example, if you play a little guitar, and you show up at a mega church on Sunday morning, and you sit in the audience and you listen to the worship team as they sing songs from their newest album, you're sitting there going, I am never getting on that stage, and I know you are not. And if you only play a little guitar, you shouldn't be on that stage. Not good for them, not good for the people they're listening, and not good for you. It's not the right fit. It doesn't make sense. They're not being exclusionary. That's part of what needs to happen at that size. No, people who don't play well should not be on the stage in front of 2,000 people. It's not the appropriate venue for that. But if you play a little guitar and you show up at a church of 50 on Sunday morning, you're going to be leading worship in a month. In fact, forget a month. They're going to ask you, is the guitar in your car now? Right? Am I right or am I right? That's the small church experience. And that's one of the reasons that people choose to go to a small church. I've asked a lot of small church people over the last few years why they go to a small church, and here are the top 3 answers. First answer, because the pastor knows my name. There are a lot of people out there who want to be pastored by their pastor. Bunch of freaks. And yet they're sometimes treated that way. How dare you want to be pastored by your pastor? There's nothing wrong with wanting to go to a church small enough so you can be pastored by your pastor. That the person who's preaching on Sunday morning baptizes you and is on the other end of the phone when you have a life problem that you're trying to figure out. If that's what you want and need for your spiritual growth, to actually be pastored by the pastor, go to a small church, get that blessing. There's nothing wrong with that. That is a perfectly appropriate way to get your spiritual nourishment and your ability to minister. So the first reason is the pastor knows my name. The second reason is they miss me when I'm gone. They miss me when I'm gone. And reason number 3 is I can have an impact there, and I can't have an impact in every church. Like the person who only plays a little guitar. I'm just going to be an audience at a big church. I can help lead in a small church, and they will be thrilled with my faulting four-chord playing of a guitar because nobody has done it for 10 years. And I can contribute. And people want to be able to contribute. For instance, Shelley and I were in a mega church a few years ago for a conference. And at the end, the mega church had just gone through a huge renovation. It had cost a couple $100,000, which was appropriate for the size of the church. And completely repainting, and they did a rebranding of the logo and of the color scheme and everything else, and the signage, and they walked me through it. It was so really, really well done. Just not luxurious, but just quality to kind of think like, yeah, this is the way this ought to be done. It was really, really good. But then I thought, you know what, in a smaller church, that's not the way we redo the facilities. In a smaller church, you don't hire a design firm. In a smaller church, you've got a couple of ladies who 4 times a year go into the attic or back into the shed, and they find the fall colors or the Christmas stuff or the Easter stuff or the summer stuff. And they're chosen because they decorate their house nicely. So you get a couple ladies who know how to decorate their house nicely, and they get out the stuff from last year, and they go through it, and they toss the stuff that's broken, or it's just a little too old, and then they go to Walmart or Dollar General, and they get a few things to replace those with. So every year it's just slightly fresher than it was last year, but a lot of it's familiar from last year, and they decorate the sanctuary and the lobby, and they do it beautifully, and they get to contribute, and they would not have been able to use those skills in a big church. And the big church is not wrong for not being able to use those skills, and the small church is not less than because they are able to use those skills. Each has the ability to use different skills and be grateful that we have both sizes, that everybody can contribute in different ways. It's just different, but it's okay. So one of the reasons people go to a small church is because they have the kinds of abilities. They aren't lesser abilities, they're simply small church abilities. And if they were in a big church, they'd be sitting passive because their skills are not usable in this context. So they go to a small church and their skills and gifts and passion are usable in this context. So let's use them. In the small church, people can have a bigger impact. So let's make sure that we provide a chance to do that. Now, here is the primary reason why these differences exist between small churches. Big church principles center on process, systems, and curriculum. And by center on, I don't mean that that's what's important to them. I mean that when the ministerial staff gathers together, they spend most of their time talking about processes and systems and programs, because when you've got hundreds or thousands of people coming through on a weekend, if those processes, systems, and programs break down at all, the whole thing falls to pieces. So they spend a lot of time doing that, and they spend a lot of time teaching that in their books and at their conferences, because that's what they're learning. That's fine. That's not the way it is in small churches. In small churches, those 3 things are important as well. Process, systems, and programs are important in small churches, but they come a very distant second to relationships, culture, and history. Pastoral leadership in a small church context needs to spend most of its time on relationships, culture, and history. Now, if you're a process person, you may have to continue to remind yourself to stop being so process-driven and start spending time having actual conversations with people. And for those who are already driven by relationships, culture, and history, that may be why the Lord has placed you in a small church context, because that gift is going to be more used there. Now, relationships matter in big churches too. Culture matters in big churches too. History matters in big churches too. But they approach all 3 of them very differently. In a big church, relationships, it's not everybody knows everybody. It's let's make sure that everybody is known by somebody. And so they do it in small groups. Culture. If they're teaching culture from a big church standpoint, what you will hear is, you, pastor, your staff, you go in, you establish the culture. Oh yeah, okay, you tried to do that in a small church, and enjoy your next congregation. And history. Big churches don't worry about the past history, they're making new history. Just by their size, they're just cutting through everything. So how do these things relate in a small church? Here's how. One, relationships. Often small church pastors will ask me, what's a good curriculum for discipleship and mentoring in a small church? And my answer is always, whatever works for you. Now, how can I be so blasé about it? Here's why. In a small church, our discipleship and should not be curriculum or program driven. Our discipleship needs to be relationship driven. In fact, in a small church, we don't have to, we get to use the best discipleship system ever devised. It's the discipleship system that was used by Jesus and by Paul and by the early church. It's a system called mentoring. We don't have to mentor, we get to mentor. And mentoring is better than curriculum. Now, curriculum is not wrong or bad. We use curriculum in our church. But in a smaller church, the curriculum is there to supplement the mentoring. The curriculum should never be used to replace the mentoring. But we are in a culture that is so program-driven that in a lot of our heads we can't even conceive of it. We just think we've got to do discipleship. What do we have to do? We've got to buy a program. We've got to buy a system. We've got to buy a curriculum. And often what we're doing is we're not discipling people. We're just getting them through classes. Now, there's nothing wrong with the classes. If you get the head knowledge, that's great. But if all you're getting is a head knowledge from somebody who's talking to you out of a curriculum, and there's no relationship, it's not mentoring, therefore it's not true discipleship. It's just information dissemination. And information is a part of discipleship, but it's not the primary part of discipleship. The primary part of discipleship is relational. It is information through relationship. That's what mentoring is. Now, in a smaller church, we get to do that a little more hands-on with the members. Now, curriculum is helpful because curriculum can give you theological guardrails, and it can give you time stamps so you don't waste your time getting stuck in the weeds, so it keeps you moving along at a good pace. But curriculum should always supplement mentoring. It should never replace mentoring, especially in a small church, because in a small church, everything is done based on relationships. And if you deny that, you will have a hard time in a small church. So relationships, secondary culture. When I say culture, I don't mean one church is traditional and another church is contemporary. That's stylistic, that's above the surface. What I mean is beneath the surface. The culture is the unwritten set of rules that governs everything a church does. When somebody says, well, that's just the way it is here, that's a statement of culture. In fact, the strongest culture enforcers in your congregation probably don't know they're enforcing culture. It's just the way we do things here. It's what it means to be fill in your denomination here, a Lutheran, a Mennonite, a Baptist, right? That's just what it means to be that. I'm not doing anything, I'm just doing what it means to be They're enforcing culture. Enforcing culture. Culture is the unwritten set of rules that governs everything we do. The best teaching on culture that I've ever seen is in a book, and I know that some of you are aware of this book because I've seen some of you carrying it around. It's usually bound in leather. Took you a moment, but yeah, you're with me now, thank you. Yes, Jesus taught a parable that is really about culture. It's the parable of the sower. The parable of the sower is a parable about church culture. Or at least it can be applied to that, and I will. So Jesus says there's a sower who goes out to sow seed. And he throws it on 4 different types of land, 3 of which are bad and only 1 of which is good. And I remember even as a 10-year-old in Sunday school hearing that parable and going, that's the worst farmer ever. Were they just stupid about farming 2,000 years ago? I was a 10-year-old in the city, and I knew you don't sort of randomly scatter seed. You dig a hole and you put it specifically in a hole designed for it. Even I knew that as a 10-year-old in the city. And I'm sitting there, they must have just been dumb 2,000 years ago. No, they knew more than a 20th century kid in the city. But so when Jesus always had a twist in his parable. So when Jesus starts a parable about farming with a farmer just randomly scattering seed, everybody in the place goes, oh, this is not a lesson about farming. he did that intentionally to say, this is a lesson used in farming about something else. So that's what it immediately did. So, and what it is, it's really about, it's about culture. And let me walk you through it. I want you to imagine in your church that you present a new idea. You throw a good seed out. Hey, here's an idea. And their church responds with, we don't do it that way in our church. Jesus describes that as the first type of seed, the seed that goes onto the first type of soil. It goes onto the hard soil, the pathway, in fact. And the pathway in the middle of the field is simply land that's been walked on so much that it's gotten hard. That was our church when we showed up 27 years ago. They were hard, not because they were mean, but because they've been walked on for 10 years. They built up a resistant layer to it because they were hurt. So Jesus says the seed goes and it lands on top of it and it doesn't penetrate. The birds of the air come pick it up. No harvest because it won't go in. Why? Because it's stubborn. So how do you deal with stubborn culture? You have to soften the ground. What did we do in our church? I told you for the first 7 years we did what? We had nothing but worship services and public fellowships. Why? We needed to learn how to love Jesus again and like each other again. We had to soften the ground. They'd grown hard and untrusting, especially of the pastor, because they'd been through 5 and 10 years and 4 of them had left in scandal. And we knew we needed to earn their trust again. And the only way you can re-earn trust is to do the right thing every time for a long time. It's the only way to do it. Want to re-earn trust? Do the right thing every time for a long time. There's no shortcut. So for 7 years, I did what I could to be trustworthy every situation for as long as I could. And then it finally got softer and it became ready to receive the seed. So if you've got a stubborn culture, even if they're acting mean, the meanness is probably more from hurt. And the meanness has become a defense mechanism against their pain. So find the point of pain and pour water on it to soften the hearts. Make it more receptive to the seed. Or maybe you present an idea and you got the second type of soil. So you present an idea and they go, hey, that's a great idea, Pastor. And then no one shows up for the planning meeting. That was our second church, the Church of the Mountains. Nobody opposed any idea we had. We're cool with that, dude. There was a lot of that going on in the hills of Santa Cruz, I can tell you. Right? And they were cool with everything, but they never showed up to help. Nothing ever followed through. They never completed the task ever. Why? Immature. Immature. Jesus describes it this way. The seed goes in, it grows up immediately. But then the heat of the day comes and burns it. It's gone. Why? Because it's shallow. It doesn't have enough depth to take root. So some of us have a shallow culture in our church. How do you deal with a shallow culture? You got to go deep. How do you go deep? God's Word will take us there. So what do? We teach not just the knowledge about God's Word, but how to enact God's Word in our lives. What does it mean to be a mature believer, not just a long-time believer? What does it mean to actually act as a believer during the week and not just on Sunday morning? What does it mean outside the walls of this church? What does it mean outside the use of religious language? How do we become a church that's actually acting like Christ rather than just knowing about Christ? So if you have a shallow culture, it may be filled with people who've been in the church all their lives, but all they've been doing is putting in time, and there's no real depth to their walk. So help them go deeper. Be an example of a deeper walk. Teach a deeper walk. Give them opportunities for a deeper walk. Teach them depth. And then the root can go deeper. Or maybe it's a third type of culture that Jesus describes. You present an idea and they go, oh, that's a great idea, Pastor. Let's add that to the 17 other events we're involved in this week. That's the busy church culture. Jesus describes it as the seed goes. It goes in and it grows up, but it grows up among weeds, thorns, thistles. And it says the busyness of life chokes out the good seed. Some of us have a busy church culture, maybe from when the church was bigger and it was big enough to have all those departments and all those events. But the church has gotten smaller and nobody's had the heart to cut any of those events out. And now you're just trying to do too much. And it chokes out the good seed because now it's just about programs and events and getting the stuff done. And it's become far less about the seed, about the mission. And so when that happens, what do we need to do? We need to simplify. We need to do less so we can do it better. We'll talk about some practical ways to get there this afternoon. But a lot of our churches need to simplify. Clutter builds up naturally. You don't need to work to add clutter to either your home or to your church calendar. Clutter just happens. You've got to work hard to constantly trim it back, to simplify it, to get rid of the weeds. But then the fourth soil, what did Jesus say? It goes in and it produces a harvest. Why? Because it's soft, it's deep, and it's been cleared of weeds. And so that's where our churches need to get to. Now, for some of you, you may be thinking, okay, he's just identified my church. And if that's the case, then this 10 minutes is going to be your biggest takeaway from today. Here's the challenge for a lot of us. We have not been taught about culture. And again, in a big church context, they'd say you go in and you just change that culture and you establish that culture. You can't do that in a small church. In a small church, you need to first of all understand the culture, then let them know what you appreciate about the culture, and only then will they give you a chance to maybe contribute to the culture and potentially change it. But you don't get the chance to change it until you show that you understand it, show that you appreciate it, show that you're participating in it. Then you might get a chance to help change it. See, in a big church, if you walk in, nobody walks into a big church thinking, I'm going to change the culture here. You walk into a big church and you understand the culture and you go either, I like it and I'm staying, or I don't like it and I'm finding a church with a different culture. But in a small church, especially one that's been around a while, and people who've been in it for a while, again, they don't even realize it. It's all subconscious. They are the culture enforcers, and they will continue to enforce it, and they will not let you touch it until they see that you know it, appreciate it, and are participating in it. Then you have a chance to lead it. But that's where you've got to start in the small church. So if you're looking at that going, oh, it's a culture issue, here's the deal. A lot of us in small churches think it's a mission issue, and so we keep throwing seed at the soil. It doesn't matter how much seed you throw at it. If the soil is bad, nothing's going to grow. If you've got a culture issue, stop throwing seed on bad soil. Fix the soil first. That's what we did without knowing it in the first 7 years of our church. Remember I told you we didn't even do any outreach. Why? We had to get to mix the metaphors, we had to get the infection out of the hospital. What we were also doing was softening a hard soil, deepening an immature soil, and simplifying a busy soil. They had all three problems. And it took us 7 years to get to the point where you are now soft and simple and ready to receive. And so when we finally did launch, hey, we're going to start doing things, it took to it readily because we've taken 7 years to deal with culture. So if culture is your issue, and you were trying to do mission, now what do I do? Got to fix the culture. The best place I know to go to that, a friend of mine wrote a book called Dirt Matters, and if you go to the website that will be up there again, newsmallchurch.com/RI2019, there is a note in there that has a link to this book. It's called Dirt Matters by a guy named Jim Powell. It's a small book, and he comes from a small church standpoint. He's also pastored large churches, but it mostly comes from a small church standpoint. And Jim talks about how to identify whether or not your church has a culture issue, how to identify what your culture issue might be, and then how to fix your culture issue. So that then it's ready to cast a good seed of mission into. So if you identify that, stop everything until you fix culture. That has to be done first. Another big saying in business today, and this one is true in any church of any size, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And the same thing with mission. Culture eats mission for breakfast. You cannot move a mission forward in a bad culture. You have to fix the culture first. So, culture, and then finally this one, history. History. Small towns have long memories. And so do small churches. Some of it evidenced by the cemeteries in your backyard. Right? Long histories. Here's the challenge. For a lot of us, this history, which we want to use as a foundation to build upon, too often feels like an anchor weighing us down. So how do we in a small church take the history that we want to build on and turn it into that instead of being the anchor that's weighing us down? Again, the whole my church, small church is weird thing applies here because depending on what your history is and how long it is. I mean, I'm in California. We just had our 50th, We just did a big celebration for our church's 50th anniversary. Woo, 50 years. That's a big deal in California. I know 50 years means you're the new church in town. Here I get it. Right? You just got a longer history than we do. California's just new. It's just the way it is. So, there are certain things that won't apply. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an illustration of what happened in our church. You can take as much of it as it works for you and toss a dozen. We celebrated our church's 50th anniversary a few years ago. And so we got out all the stuff from the archives, old bulletins, old pictures, everything else. We put it on a beautiful display in the hallway. And as I'm looking at it, I come across this picture, this article, and I took this picture. This article from a local newspaper, not a Christian newspaper, but the local free giveaway paper that used to be given away in the 7-Elevens all the time before every big thing went online. This is that. So just a year or two after the church started, this article came out about our church entitled, I love this title, "The Church Can Work with Delinquents." Now, if you're under 40, delinquent doesn't mean they're late in paying their bills. When kids used to make a mess in the town, we used to call them juvenile delinquents. Today we call them at-risk youth. That's a better title. But back then we called them juvenile delinquents. The first paragraph of this article reads like this: "As an institutional caseworker and probation officer, I searched for many months for a church really concerned about the needs of juvenile delinquents. Until recently, I could find none." So think about this. We think all these problems, the separation of church and state and everything else is undue, right? And churches not being able to work with each other, or churches not being able to work with the government agency. There's nothing to do. This is the 60s, okay? And here he is, probation officer, caseworker, wants to help the kids, wants to work with the church to help the kids, and can't find a church that will cooperate until recently. And then he describes finding this brand new church with this brand new pastor. And the pastor says, "Yeah, we'll work with you. We want to reach a new generation in a new way. We'll try new ideas. If it doesn't work, that's fine. We'll try another idea. We're really excited about the future. We want to move forward." And it's an interview with the founding pastor of our church. And as I read it, I took that picture because as I'm reading it, about 150 feet to my right, in our already too small parking lot, for 15 years, we have run the only skateboard park in our town. Now, why do we have a skateboard park in a parking lot when we don't have enough parking already anyway? Because about 15 years ago, when we resurfaced the parking lot, all of a sudden there was noise outside, and we went out and there were skateboarders everywhere because we had the smoothest surface in town. We live 3 miles from the Pacific Ocean. It's a skate and surf culture. And nobody had built a park. So whatever was smooth, that's where they went. So my youth pastor and I looked at each other and realized we had a decision to make. We can either go out and buy a whole bunch of no skateboarding signs, or we can build some ramps. And we decided the churches on defense put up signs, and churches on offense put up ramps. And we built ramps. And since then, for the last 15 years, we run the only skateboard park in town. And in the last 15 years, more kids have come to Christ and more of their families have come to Christ because the kid wanted to skateboard at our church than every other effort we have done combined. They were on our property already. So I took the picture because I thought anytime if anybody ever comes to me and goes, "I can't believe you've got a skateboard park in the parking lot of a church on a sacred space, I can't believe you'd allow it. The founders of our church would be appalled if they knew you were doing this in a sacred space." I would pull up my phone and go, "Oh, really? The church can work with delinquents." That's what our founding pastor said. Now, I know not every skateboarder is a delinquent, but it's a higher percentage, let me tell you. Ooh, I love them, but wow. You know, on a Sunday morning, there's skateboards lined up against the walls all over the place. They know they're loved. They know they're cared for. Do they make a mess? Oh, yeah. But I'll sacrifice the building for the people every day. I will never sacrifice the people for the building. Especially for the kids. And we protect it. We have to repaint a lot. They have these things called grind stoppers that you have to put on everything so that they don't push their skateboards along the edges of everything. That, the sign, the front sign is not destroyed because we protected it properly. Otherwise, they do all kinds of weird stuff. So we've had to protect it, but we're not going to give up doing the ministry because it might hurt the building. So what do we do? The founders, so what does that have to do with you? Here's what it has to do. Too often, we think we are honoring our history by doing what our founders did, when in fact that's not the best way to honor our history. Don't do what your founders did. Think like your founders thought. So maybe when you go home, go and find those founding documents of your church or even your denomination, and find the crazy out there visionary statements that they made. Because if you find the founding documents of your congregation, of your denomination, what you will not find is statements like, we are starting this church so that we can worship Jesus on this color of carpet until Jesus comes. Pews bolted to the floor is one of our founding principles that will never change. You won't find that in the founding documents. You won't. What you'll find is visionary statements like the church can work with delinquents and we're going to reach a new generation in a new way and we're going to do whatever it takes. Those are the kinds of statements they make. So what do? How do you build on the foundation? You build on the way they thought, not on what they did. We don't honor our founders by doing the same thing they did. The reason they founded the church was because they left another church so they could do a new thing. If they wanted to keep doing the same thing, they wouldn't have founded a new church. They'd have stayed at their old church. Somebody at some point was a visionary and a pioneer who started the thing. So we honor the founders by thinking the way they thought. I'm not telling you if you're Mennonite, stop being Mennonite, if you're Lutheran, to stop being Lutheran or whatever. I'm talking about being more Mennonite, being more Lutheran by going back to the founders and what they said it was supposed to be about from the beginning. Most of what we call Lutheranism or Baptist or Mennonite or Methodist or whatever background we're from, most of what we call that are the things that have been added since, just like most of what we call Christian are things that we've added to the Jesus story and not the initial Jesus story. We got to strip it back to that. Think like they thought, not do what they did. And that's it for them. So the two sessions that are coming up, as you can see there, how to discover what your church does well, finding and mentoring volunteers in today's internal civil church. And yeah, books back there as well. And I think that's it for this session then. To Jeff. Man, my timing is better today than usual. I'm hitting like 1 minute under my limit twice in a row. That is as good as